Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Meantime, in Washington, House Republicans have finally succeeded in impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. This is the first impeachment of a cabinet secretary in about 150 years. The vote was 214 to 213, with all Democrats voting no and 3 Republicans also voting no. Let's start with a clip of Congressman Mark Green now saying that the Senate has a job to do.
Secretary Mayorkas has shown throughout his tenure that he will defy, he will ignore, and he will replace the laws enacted by this Congress. His actions have not only shown a disdain for the Constitution, but for the Congress, the law, and the American people. The constitutional case against Secretary Mayorkas is sound. It's now time for the Senate to do its duty, to step up, hold a trial, and convict Secretary Mayorkas.
Kim, what do you make of this move to impeach Mayorkas, particularly given that I don't think anybody, including Congressman Green, really believes that Chuck Schumer's Senate is going to convict him and remove him from office?
Yeah, I mean, look, we went through in prior episodes of this some of the issues with the legal argument. You're now referring to the political question here. Notably, remember, this vote actually failed last week when Democrats essentially pulled one of their members out of a hospital, rolled him out on the floor so that he could make up one additional vote. And it caught Republicans off guard and they didn't have enough votes to succeed. This time, they actually hauled back Steve Scalise, who was in the leadership and who was undergoing cancer treatment, so that he would be present so that they could eke this over the finish line. I appreciate that right now, when you have a Republican Congress that has done so little over the past year, I mean, other than that debt ceiling agreement, they have not done really anything of great consequence. We've ended up having a lot of continuing resolutions to put off government shutdowns. They still haven't finished any of those appropriations bills that need to finish out this fiscal year. They are struggling right now to get a FISA reform bill over the finish line. They have exactly 5 more legislative days until we hit the next deadline for a government shutdown. So this is something they felt that they could largely agree on, vote for, and look as though they're getting tough on the border. As we noted, as you just noted, it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to be successful in the Senate. I suppose they can flag it out there for their voters and say, see, we're tough on the border. I have to imagine that at least some voters, though, are wondering, where's the beef? Meaning, why don't you actually get serious about some of the legislation that's hanging around in which there's an opportunity to do something substantive legislatively at the border? That is something they cannot wrap their heads around and agree on.
But if that's what independent and swing voters are thinking, there may be a sign of it in this race in New York on Long Island to replace George Santos, who was expelled from Congress. And we talked about this on the podcast yesterday. Polls had suggested it was going to be a close fight between former Congressman Tom Suozzi and Republican challenger Mazie Pilip. And what happened is we now have the results in from Tuesday's voting, and it's more like an 8-point victory for Suozzi. And the connection here, I think, is notable, Alicia, because Tom Suozzi came out in favor of that Senate border bill that was negotiated by Republican Senator James Lankford. He said that it was the best opportunity to secure the border in 40 years. And remember, that Lankford deal included some provisions tightening the standard for claiming asylum in the United States. It included some provisions for emergency closures of the border. And I do wonder whether Republicans are giving a political opening to the other side. They're going through this impeachment of Mayorkas, which is not going to change any of the facts on the ground at the border. And meantime, they're not taking up any sort of legislation like the Lankford bill or making amendments to it if they think they can make improvements to it, and giving an opportunity to Democrats in some of these swing seats, in some of these swing Senate races that we're going to be seeing in Montana and Ohio, to say, look, I support something like the Lankford deal, and it's not me who's standing in the way. It's Republicans who don't want to solve the problem because they don't think President Trump wants the problem solved until November.
Donald Trump came out against this bill, and that put the kibosh on it because nobody wanted to get on the wrong side of Donald Trump, or no Republicans, James Lankford aside. And this bill, as Tom Suozzi said, it was probably the most conservative border immigration legislation that's passed in more than 40 years. I think our editorial said, 100 years going back to the Chinese Exclusion Act. It had some real teeth to it. But many Republicans figured, well, we'll just run on the issue of the border chaos. They didn't want to hand Biden a victory on this because they were worried that might actually, in some ways, neutralize the issue in November. And at least if you look at some of the polls, immigration and the border mess is ranking now even higher than the economy in terms of what voters view as the most important issue right now. But the Republicans may have miscalculated it, as you said, in a lot of these swing districts. Again, they're not hardline Republican districts. The swing districts actually want Congress to actually do something about this. And they're not just watching what, some of these Fox News pundits and other, right-wing voices out there who are trashing the bill. Swing voters are actually ticked off that nothing happens. And so there's actual real political risk in killing this bill.
Thank you, Alicia and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.